Welcome to my world buff guide for Classic WoW. In this video, I'll be showing you how to get every world buff safely and as efficient as possible. As always, be sure to hit the like button if this video helped you out. Starting things off, you need to get the add-on Nova World Buffs. I'll leave a link to that in the description of this video. Be sure to pick that up as I'll be referencing it throughout this video. Alongside that, I recommend joining your server Discord. Inside, there should be a dedicated channel on when world buffs are going to drop. And then lastly, before we start, make sure you buy some chrono boons off of the auction house. Alternatively, you can go and do the quest in Western Plaguelands and buy them directly from Chromie. I'll leave a link to that quest in the description as well. So to start things off, we're going to head to Felwood to get the Songflower Serenade. This is really easy on a high pop server. Using Nova World Buffs, we're going to open up our map and just head to either Flight Path for Horde or Alliance, and there's almost always a timer up on just about every single layer. Once the timer's up, you're just going to spam right click and everyone will receive the buff. And then you're going to go ahead and use your chrono boon to store it. If you are in a lower pop server and you do not have any timers, I'll leave a link to the quest you have to complete in order to cleanse a corrupted Songflower, which enables these timers. The next buff we're going to get is the Spirit of Zandalar. This buff only becomes available whenever the Zul'Gurub raid has been opened. This buff will drop when a player turns in the Heart of Hakkar. This is a quest item that drops off a Hakkar, the final boss within Zul'Gurub. Upon completion, the buff will drop in Ujamba Isle and in Booty Bay. I prefer to be in Booty Bay as it is typically a little bit safer. When the buff drops, we're going to right click on our supercharged chrono boon to unboon our Songflower we got earlier, and then we're going to use another chrono boon to store both of those buffs. This is the only window where you have a chance of losing your Songflower, so that's why I like getting both of these first. Last thing to mention is this world buff does not have a cooldown. So anytime a player turns in the Heart of Hakkar, the world buff will always drop. This will make more sense as we talk about the other world buffs that do have a cooldown timer. Starting with Rallying Cry of the Dragonslayer. This buff will drop whenever a player turns in either the Head of Onyxia or the Head of Nefarian, which drops off of the respective bosses, Onyxia and Nefarian. This buff will drop in Orgrimmar for Horde or Stormwind for the Alliance. Both of these have a separate cooldown, so it's important to look at Nova World Buffs to track whenever this is potentially going off of cooldown and someone might drop it. You can also visually tell when the buff is on cooldown. In Orgrimmar, you will see that the Ani head or Nef head is on a spike, indicating that the buff is on cooldown. And for Alliance, if you head to the front of Stormwind, you can tell by the Ani head and Nef head being tied up by some chains. It's important to mention that you can bypass the cooldown by having the opposing faction mind control the NPC that would hand out the buff. Horde and Alliance will have to kill the NPC while they're being mind controlled. Shortly after being killed, the NPC will respawn and the cooldown for the buff is reset. This is when using the server Discord is going to be very helpful to track and coordinate when certain buffs are going to go out. Whether that's Ani head, Nef head, Heart of Hakkar, and then of course the next buff we're going to talk about, which is going to be Warchief's Blessing. This is another world buff that will drop in Orgrimmar as well as in the Barrens. This buff drops when a player turns in the Head of Rend Blackhand, a quest item from the Onyxia attunement on the Horde side. This buff drops very quickly within Orgrimmar with only 6 seconds before it goes out. However, if you're in the Barrens, this will be an extended timer. This buff also does have a cooldown, and you can visually see this cooldown by looking at the spike right next to Thrall. Alliance players can receive this buff as well, but they'll need to have a Horde player mind control them or use a mind control cap. And if you're watching this in the future, during Season of Discovery, Alliance had their own separate quest line which would give them an identical buff, and it was called Might of Stormwind. As of the recording of this video, this is not available on the Classic Anniversary Realms or the Classic Era servers. However, if this does get added, I'll be sure to update that in the description of this video. Next, we have the 3 Dire Maul tribute buffs, which you'll get out of Dire Maul North. I'll leave a link to a video showing exactly what a tribute run is, but for the sake of this video, we're going to keep it short and sweet and to the point. On screen will be a walkthrough on what to do inside of a Dire Maul tribute, so you're not confused. But essentially all we're doing is paying a hunter a small fee for a cleared Dire Maul tribute, and then avoiding any of the trash along the way. The main thing to avoid here is going to be the trash on the left right when you enter. Avoiding Crom Crush and Fungus in this courtyard. And then after this, you're just going to be running to the King buff and then speaking to the 3 guards on the way out, those being Slipkick, Fungus, and then Moldar. If you're ever unsure on which mobs are hostile or friendly, just hover your cursor over them and you'll see a sword if the mob is hostile, and you'll see the hand if they are not. The only mob this doesn't apply to is the demons, as they are always going to be friendly. An additional thing to mention is the Eye of Kilrogs that are in here. Sometimes they are hostile and you'll need to kill them. However, most hunters clear the instance and make them friendly. For the last world buff, we have Sage's Dark Fortune, which is the Darkmoon Faire world buff. The Faire will rotate between Mulgore and Elwyn Forest. You simply just need to speak with Sage to get the buff. Going into your Nova world buff settings and scrolling down to the part that says Darkmoon Faire, you can automate this process by not having to select each dialogue line and just toggling on which buff you want to receive. Just about everyone's going to get the damage buff, but for healers, I highly recommend going for the resistance buff, especially during progression. Easier said than done, so I want to segue into the last part of this video, which will be the tips and tricks, as well as just some general guidelines to get these buffs as safely as possible. First up, we'll be getting Darkmoon Faire when it's at your opposing faction city. The biggest thing to do is to get a battleground queue set up ahead of time. All you'll do is res, interact with Sage, and then take the battleground queue. You're always going to queue up for Alterac Valley. This is going to be the safest out of the 3 battlegrounds. The reason for this is you'll always be spawned in at the beginning of the cave, even if the game is already in progress. This will be far safer than joining a Warsong Gulch or an Arathi Basin that's already in progress. To make targeting Sage easier, you can set up an interact with target keybind. Go to options and then go to controls. From here, you're going to check the box that says enable interact key, and then right below that, you're going to set up a keybind. In this example, I'm using the number 3. You could also take things a step further by using something like a shadow reflector so you don't get death coiled, or additionally using a macro like I have on screen, which will pop my shield wall, my shadow reflector, my blazing emblem, and on top of that, it will use a limited invulnerability potion as well as a tuber for some additional health. Okay, with all that being said, that's a lot of information, so let's go ahead and recap and go step by step. First, we're going to set up our Darkmoon Faire automation with Nova world buffs. After that, we're going to set up our interact keybind, and then we're going to go through and do the steps as follows. We're going to pre-target Sage, take our res, and then spamming our interact keybind as well as the macro we talked about earlier. Once you get the buff, take your battleground queue, and then once inside, you're going to unboon your buffs, and then use a chrono boon to store them all together. And the last bit of information I want to give you is, say you have 60 minutes left of your Darkmoon Faire, but the Faire just left, and you have no way of refreshing it. So you want to try to preserve the buff for an additional raid or 2. Here's how you're going to do that. First, we're going to click off all of our buffs except for Darkmoon Faire, and then we're just going to go about getting all of our buffs just like normal, but this time we're never going to unboon that Darkmoon Faire unless we are in a safe location, either unflagged or within an instance like RFC or Stockades. You could also go into Champions Hall. This is the PvP gear area for Alliance, or for Horde, you can go into the Hall of Legends. So when you go get Songflower, for example, you're technically in a flagged PvP zone. So what you'll do is you'll set up your Hearthstone ahead of time, putting it in Stormwind for the Alliance and Orgrimmar for Horde. After getting your Songflower, Heart to Stormwind or Orgrimmar, and then you're going to go run inside of RFC or Stockades, and then once inside, it'll be safe to unboon that Darkmoon Faire, and then reboon that new Songflower that you just got. And you're just going to rinse and repeat that process, making sure that you're either unflagged or you're in an instance before you unboon your buffs. And I recommend this principle going forward so you're not spending a ton of time going re-pick up all of your buffs because you decided to unboon in Booty Bay, for example, rather than going inside of an instance and doing it safely. You're only ever going to lose like 2 to 3 minutes of your buffs anyways, so there's really no reason not to do this. Another thing you can do is taking a flight path to an uncontested zone, so something like flying from the Barrens to Camp T will do that. Just something I thought I'd mention, but I think that running into RFC or Stockades is a little bit faster. Now that we've covered all the buffs you'll get on a regular basis, let's talk about the more niche buffs, starting with the Fire Resistance buff in Upper Blackrock Spire. You'll need to have a priest mind control one of the spellbinders, and once controlling them, they'll have the option to buff you with a Fire Resistance buff. This is really going to be focused on progression in hardcore, or anyone looking to speedrun. Also, you cannot use a chrono boon to store this buff. Next, we have the BFD buff. This is really just going to be for your Frost mages, as it will give you 5 int, 5 spirit, and 15 frost damage. all you do is interact with the shrine behind Gelahast. I'll leave a video showing exactly how to get here, but to condense this information down, that's all there really is to it. Just keep in mind that this is a debuff, so if you die with this buff, you will lose it, and it is also not boonable. Next, we have a horde-specific buff with Razorhide. This is going to be specifically for your tanks. This will give them additional armor and also give them a Thorns-like buff. You'll need to complete Tribes of War from Mangletooth, located in Camp T. Upon completion, you will need 4 blood shards to receive the buff. This only lasts 10 minutes, so you're really going to only use this for something like progressing on Patchwork, Lotheb, or Saffron. 2 more buffs that I'm going to briefly mention that are banned off of Warcraft logs, and you cannot boon these as well. The first being the Traces of Silithyst. This becomes available when the AQ40 gates have been opened. You'll loot a piece of sand off of the ground and then bring it to your respective camp. Once you turn this in, you will be granted the buff. Again, you cannot boon this and you cannot bring it in raids or your logs will be invalidated. Same thing for the Soul Revival buff. This becomes available during the Scourge invasion. You'll receive this buff when a damaged necrotic shard is destroyed. Again, you cannot boon this buff, and if you do bring this into a raid, you will invalidate your logs. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, be sure to leave those in the comments down below. Hit the like button if this video helped you out. And as always, I will see you in the next video.